In this section of the course, we are going to go back to our previous static version of the GraphQL instance, and we're going to be extending it to add some media upload and image management to it. Now, the reason why we go back to the static version first is because I want to highlight some key concepts of how to use GraphQL and how to upload images and how to use the mutations in GraphQL to manage images. And once we understand that, we're then going to progress in the course to talk about how to implement this feature with authentication in place as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to extend our application where we had a static model of users and cars. And remember, there's a relationship between the user and the car via this car's property, which is an array of IDs. So the car here, or this number 1 here in the car's property, represents the ID of this car. And also remember that because these are objects in an array, the IDs need some modification because we need to decrease the ID by 1 to get the first element of the user's array, which is of course starts with index 0. So before we write any code, let's install the dependencies that we will need via npm. So we will need to install Cloudinary, and this is because we need to use their plugin, their Node.js SDK in this app. I'm also going to work with Malter, which is a great npm package to handle file uploads. Then I will install Node Fetch because I just like the Fetch API. This is going to be used for sending GraphQL queries from our front-end interface that we are going to be built as well. And the front-end itself will be built using Pug, which is a templating language that's very easy to use in a Node Express setup. Okay, so these are the dependencies that we will be using. So let's go ahead and install these. Okay, after the installation is complete, let's create 2 folders at the root of the project. One I'm going to call public, and the other one I'm going to call uploads. So public is going to be the folder where we're going to have the front end placed, and uploads is going to be the folder where we're going to store the files that are uploaded to Node.js, and then from there we're going to push the files to Cloudinary. Now, of course, there shouldn't be a need to store the files in Node.js because eventually they are going to be stored in Cloudinary. That's where we are ending up storing our media assets. But just to walk you through in a step-by-step approach, I'm going to show you how to achieve upload from a front end to Node.js and then from Node.js to Cloudinary. Okay, so the next thing that we will do is make sure that we can create a front end. So I'm going to open app.js, and this is the code that we ended up in a previous lecture. And what I'm going to do is make sure that this Express application is not only acting as a GraphQL instance, as a, an instance of the Apollo server, but it will also act as an HTTP server to serve the front end that we will build under the public folder. So in light of this, what I'm going to do is make sure that I set up this application to have a view engine, and I can do that via app.set in Express by specifying view engine, and the view engine is going to be Pug. And we also need to tell Express where the views are going to be that make up this application, and it's going to be in the root folder /public. Okay, now that's done, what we can do is create routes. So we have an app.get, so every time when someone accesses the root of our application using the HTTP method of get, I will want to run a handler function, and the handler function is going to be routes.index, and from this you can probably tell that I need to create a new file as well called routes.js, and that's where we're going to have the root definitions. So let's create the root definition for when someone wants to see the root of the application. So I'm going to call that index, and for that I'm going to actually run a very simple GraphQL query as well. So let's do this. So there must be a request and a response. I need to construct a query here. So this is going to be a GraphQL query, and this should return and render our index page. This is going to be a very simple example for now, and what I will do is, of course, module.exports and export index. Going back to app.js, I need to make sure that I get roots and require roots.js, and now roots.index references this function that we created. So this is going to render index. So where does that index come from? Well, remember here we said the views folder is in public. So in public, I'm going to definitely create an index.pug file. And the way pug templates work is that they need a layout as well. So I'm going to create a layout pug file as well. So I'm going to take this layout to be very simple. And this course is not on pug, but in a nutshell, I can tell you that all you need to do is specify the HTML elements as you see here. And to nest these elements, I used tabs. And what this is going to render is going to be HTML, of course. And because there's a tab between HTML and head, it is going to render the head element as a child of HTML. And then because there's a tab between the head and the title element here, the title is going to be rendered to be the child of head. And then body is at the same level as head, so it's not going to be the child, it's going to be its own element, but still it's going to be the child of HTML. And then h1 is the actual child of body because there's a tab in there. Okay, so that's how pug templates work in a nutshell. And then we also have something called here block content. So this is going to be the place where some content is going to be loaded. Now, how do we define what this content is? Think about this content as a variable. So the content is going to be the content of index.pug. So first of all, index.pug is going to extend the layout. So it's going to extend the layout that we create, and then we specify the content block. And then here we can have an h1 element, and the h1 element can have a text that says this is the index page. So I can now save all of these, and now we can start up the application and see it in action in our browser. So let's start by nodemon app.js, or node app.js if you don't like to use nodemon. And once we get this message, GraphQL server is running on port 3000, we could probably change this message as well, but I'm not going to worry about that. We can go and open up a browser and go to localhost port 3000 and see, hopefully, our pug template in action. And here it is. So I'm in my browser. This is what I specified in the layout. So a typical example would be to, specify the head and all the meta tags in the layout file, and this is the content, the block content, and that's the content of index. Okay, so this is our basic setup. So far everything seems to be working. Now in the next video we're going to go ahead and create a query in this root, and then we're going to display the result of that query, which is going to be effectively some data in our index view.